Welcome back to Plants of the Gods. In this episode, we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Dr. Christopher McCurdy of the University of Florida, widely regarded as the leading authority on kratom, a most intriguing tropical tree from Southeast Asia. This tree has long been valued for its analgesic, stimulant, and mood-enhancing qualities. Laborers in this region have used the leaves of this tree to combat fatigue and enhance endurance, especially when toiling in the hot tropical sun. In recent times, scientific investigation is evaluating this tree and its constituent alkaloids for a variety of purposes, from managing chronic pain to reducing opioid withdrawal symptoms to improving mental well-being.
Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plotkin, Dr. Mark Plotkin, an ethnobotanist with the Amazon Conservation Team and the host of the podcast Plants of the Gods. We have a special guest today, my friend and colleague, Dr. Christopher McCurdy, and he has some extraordinary insights and results he'll be sharing with you. Now, let me start by talking about the most important scientific conference you've never heard of. In 1967, there was a conference in San Francisco. Remember, this was the Summer of Love, and it was called the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. This was held at the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center, about a mile south of Golden Gate Park, where most of the action at the Summer of Love we all well know about. This was a U.S. government-sponsored conference to look at the potential for hallucinogenic plants and fungi as sources of new medical compounds, new drugs, again, sponsored by the U.S. government. It was so successful in its time, and it generated so much interest amongst the participants, people like my mentor, Richard Schultes, Alexander Sasha Shulgin, Gordon Wasson, the father of ethnomycology, that they decided that they would continue this tradition coming out of this conference in 1967, which didn't happen for 50 years. And thanks to my friend and colleague Dennis McKenna, Dr. Dennis McKenna, this effort was resuscitated 50 years later in England, a conference which once again looked at the potential for hallucinogenic plants and hallucinogenic fungi as new psychiatric and other medicines. And one of the stars of the show was Chris McCurdy, Dr. Christopher McCurdy of the University of Florida. And I think it's fair to say he blew everyone away with his talk on kratom, which is going to be the focus of our discussion today. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here, and I feel like it's a full circle moment because I was reading your book when I was in high school, actually. So it's great to see you again.
Well, now I know who bought that copy.
Exactly.
So I would like to start at the beginning and have you explain what kratom is, what it's used for traditionally, and what is being looked at. And, of course, the first question you always get in the interviews I've listened to is, how do you pronounce kratom correctly?
Right. So this is an interesting quandary, actually, now, because it's well known in the cultural, everyday street language as kratom. Kratom has become the sort of U.S. terminology for kratom, which is how it's pronounced in Malaysia and Thailand, or Ketom, actually, as it's pronounced in Malaysia. Kratom is in Thailand. We'd always called it kratom because that we also changed the name, I guess, a little bit from the traditional one because kratom seemed like a little stumbly to do. But I think the name has actually evolved just like the products have evolved away from the traditional product. And so I think it's appropriate that the name kratom has taken a foothold in the United States and in the Western world.
Well, by way of further introduction and doing my homework to prepare for this interview, I said to ChatGPT, who is the leading authority on this plant and these plant compounds, and Dr. Christopher McCurdy's name popped right up. So what I would like to point out is that this was a plant that was not discussed in the 1967 conference. They talked about things like ayahuasca. They talked about things like psilocybin. This was totally unknown to the broader ethnobotanical, ethnobiological community. And I think there's a lesson here, which is that this is a plant which has been used throughout Southeast Asia since time immemorial for many different purposes, really hadn't come to the fore, hadn't come to the to be recognized by the Western scientific community. So Dr. McCurdy is really leading that effort and brought it to the fore, and that's why we're talking about it today. So I'd like, Chris, you to tell us about the traditional uses of this plant, which are really quite stunning in and of themselves.
Sure, my pleasure. This plant really originated ground zero, we think, at the border of peninsular Malaysia and Thailand. It is a tree. It's a deciduous tree. And the leaves have been harvested and either chewed fresh in Thailand or made into a decoction or a tea in Malaysia and consumed as a beverage. It's been used for increasing strength, increasing productivity and alertness in the hot, humid environment of the Southeast Asian outdoor working. It's also been used as a recreational beverage in the evenings for sort of a sedative type relaxation, social lubricant, if you will. And that's an interesting traditional use that's only been done with the men. That is a Muslim part of the world, and there's not alcohol consumed there, and so on many evenings to relax, they would consume more or increasing amounts of this beverage in Malaysia. It's fascinating from the standpoint that it has a paradoxical effect, and so at lower doses, it seems to cause this stimulant-like improvement in endurance and performance, whereas at higher doses it seems to be somewhat sedative or some compare it to opioid-like in its nature. And so that traditional use has really been the foundation of why it became popular in that area. It also was consumed for many other ailments, so to treat pain, to treat fevers, to treat toothaches, just a whole plethora of sort of pain-related areas. And I think one of the most fascinating things that really caught our attention early on was that this is used as a substitute for opium. When individuals would run out of their raw opium or injectable heroin or whatever they're using, they would increase their consumption of Kratom tea, and they were able to ward off any of the withdrawal effects or make the withdrawal effects so they were, almost unnoticeable. That really popped the idea in our mind that this could be a novel aid in the opioid crisis and something that could help, millions of people potentially around the globe in combating opioid use disorders.
Well, this is a plant which is kind of one-stop shopping. You're saying it's used for pain relief, increases energy and stamina, combats fatigue, and manages opium withdrawal. I mean, this is a miracle plant. This is truly a plant of the gods. But I do want to pick up on one minor thing you passed over, and that was that it was used primarily in Muslim societies as a stimulating drink. And in an earlier episode, we talked about coffee. Coffee was called the wine of Islam because sometimes cultures will focus on a plant different than a culture they want to distinguish themselves against. And a perfect example of that is during the American Revolution, when the colonists wanted to no longer be Englishmen. Instead of drinking tea and rum, they began drinking bourbon and coffee. And just as Islam rejects alcohol, the fact that these people had their own stimulant, and the fact that it may help us deal with, if not solve, one of the great problems, crises, I would say, that we're facing in terms of addiction. So tell us a bit more about your work on the pharmacokinetics for a general audience, about why this seems to be so promising as a method for enhancing opium withdrawal and reducing the symptoms of withdrawal.
Sure. This is, as you mentioned, it's a pretty fascinating plant, and it seems to almost be a panacea in some ways because it not only did all those things I was mentioning, but it seems to also regulate blood glucose levels. It has applications in wound healing. There's many other things that we could brush on, but really want to focus primarily what our work has been on opioid use disorder treatments. And pharmacokinetics, just to make it a simple layman's terminology, is really what our body does to a substance or a drug or something we ingest. So how does our body handle that substance once it's been ingested? Pharmacology is really what the substance does to our body, or the effect that we get from that substance. And so the pharmacokinetics plays a vitally important role in these products, particularly in the traditional sense where it was consumed directly off the tree as a fresh leaf, either chewed, as I mentioned, or in a decoction. And it's consumed at a very inefficient extraction methods. So if we're chewing on the leaf, we're liberating what we can with our enzymes in our mouth. And if you're ingesting a tea, you're actually drinking an aqueous extract, a water extract that's incredibly inefficient at pulling the alkaloids and the active ingredients outside of that leaf material. And so we generally tend to see that the traditional use, or even in the Western world, the use of leaf material or leaf powders tends to be the safest and most benign way to ingest this, because you don't have the capability to really efficiently, with our own bodies, extract that much of the material to get to places where it would be toxic before it would become irritating to your GI system or your mouth. In other words, you can't chew enough leaf, and you can't really consume enough powder before you would vomit or something else would happen. So it sort of has this protective mechanism. However, what's happened in what we've learned through our work is that many of the products that are in the marketplace today in the Western world, particularly in the United States, are concentrates or extracts. And these have been done in solvents, some in ethanol, some in other types of liquids like oils, that much more efficiently extract these alkaloids into those product formulations. And then, as you can imagine, those product formulations, when the alkaloids are already liberated from the leaf and in the dosage form, essentially, that you're going to drink, those alkaloids are freely available, and the exposure to our bodies is much greater in a much faster time frame. And so these products tend to deliver a pharmacological effect much more rapidly than do the traditional use.
Well, you make that point in one of your papers where you talk about use traditionally. There really isn't much reported in the way of problems, but that once we start enhancing it or pulling out the active principles or mixing it with who knows what in terms of the unregulated aspects of the herbal industry, then you can run into problems. And I emphasize that we're not a medical podcast. I'm not a physician, so we're not prescribing this to anybody who has problems. All of us who go through life have our aches and pains. But this is something worthy of further study, worthy of standardization, and worthy of much more research to really get it right. Because as we pointed out in, I think it was season 2, in an episode on coca and cocaine, you know, I've chewed coca leaves for weeks at a time. I've chewed Mambe coca powder for weeks at a time without getting addicted to it. But it's when you boil out the cocaine and use that on its own that you start to create these terrible problems and these terrible addictions.
Yeah, and that's exactly a cautionary tale I actually presented at our most recent world gathering of the top scientists in Kratom. I was fortunate enough, you mentioned Dennis McKenna, he invited me to come to the Coca Summit in Peru earlier this year. By the way, it's a little teaser, our lab is finalizing import permits for coca leaf research from South America now. And we're going to start embarking on that path as well. But I was invited there to speak about the issues that we've seen with Kratom research and the parallels that you just nicely made with coca leaf and cocaine, and the fact that we're seeing a similar evolution of Kratom in the marketplace to the point now where we have one of the metabolites called 7-hydroxymitragynine being sold as an isolated or semi-synthetic product. And this is actually a pure opioid. It interacts only with opioid receptors. I've never seen a compound more selective in all the years I've been doing opioid research, which goes all the way back to my time in pharmacy school, really in the early 90s. But this is a scary and a cautionary tale I did as our sort of keynote talk at our symposia in February, just looking at the parallels. And unfortunately, cocaine, became a miracle drug, but it was associated with so much abuse and misuse and is a problem today. And has created an incredible war on drugs that will never be won, never be solved, and has caused all kinds of troubles on both sides. And what we're seeing now is the traditional Kratom being sort of concentrated, purified, adulterated, if you will, because these semi-synthetic procedures are actual chemical reactions that are taking place with byproducts that are produced and then packaged in these tablets and liquids that are being sold without purification, without any kind of regulation, as we just alluded to in this space. And so it's quite frightening talking to some of my medical toxicologist friends and emergency physicians that they're starting to see people showing up with overdoses and whatnot from these 7-hydroxy products, which are completely and should not be called Kratom products at all. I mean, these are now totally divergent from what the plant was. There's no trace back to the plant any longer.
Well, I'm struck by the oddness of the chemistry as I understand it, because some of the activity seems obviously due to alkaloids, and some of it seems obviously not due to alkaloids. And I was reading one of your accounts where you talked about when they're making these aqueous extracts, these teas, and then after a couple hours it loses its potency. And my understanding of alkaloids is they kind of live forever. So there's some weird stuff going on there. And I'd like you to talk about how maybe this is more like cannabis than psilocybin, in that it's not alkaloids that are really doing everything that this plant is doing. And that's what you're trying to understand, and why we have so much to learn.
Yeah, I think that's sort of hitting the nail on the head right now. We're just at the tip of the iceberg for this plant. Investigating alkaloids makes sense from a historical perspective because we all know that usually the pharmacologically active components are the alkaloids, and they're there for a reason, for the plant's benefit, not for necessarily our benefit. But of course, we could have that as another philosophical discussion. But the things that we're noticing is that no one has looked at anything aside from the alkaloids. So there's many other chemical classes that are within this plant. And speaking from experience, I've chewed fresh leaf, and I've drank the fresh decoctions that were made. There's a tingling sensation, almost like you get with coca leaf, not as intense that you get with coca leaf. And yes, I was able to chew coca leaf with no problems, just like Mark, when I was in Peru recently. And that tingling sensation is there, and that's what disappears, Mark. That's what disappears in a sense of time when that's made. And so it makes me think that there's obviously something there we're missing. There's an opportunity. There's many other compounds, as I suggest, and most of these compounds may be working for a similar thing that we see with cannabis, right? An entourage type effect, or they're working in this symphony. I've always equated just the alkaloids as a complex symphony orchestra of pharmacology in this plant, because it's really interesting how diverse and unique the pharmacological profiles of these different alkaloids is. But to dismiss anything else is almost like the story of pulling cocaine out and throwing the rest of the leaf out, right? So I truly believe that the best and most effective, if I can even say effective, because again, we're not anything here has been approved by the FDA and I'm not a physician, but the plant itself seems in its natural environment seems to be the complete package. And Jack Henningfield, who had been at the National Institute on Drug Abuse for many, many years, also very active in research in Kratom area, says, you know what, nature got it right. And why do we want to mess with Mother Nature's kitchen? That's established. And yeah.
Well, to follow on with a quote from you, we met at ESPD 50, but based on the success of that conference, there was an ESPD 55. And the single most interesting quote from that whole conference is this: "The interesting part is that all the alkaloids are still intact based on our analyses over time. So there's something that this plant is again trying to teach us that we seem to be ignoring, and something that we are very, very interested in really trying to understand." Please explain your quote there, Chris.
Yeah, so I think it just underscores exactly what we were just talking about, right? So the alkaloids, we've tested tea for long periods of time. We've tested dried leaves. We have dried leaves that we acquired in 2008 still. It's 2025. The alkaloid profiles have not changed very drastically under storage conditions. And so there's definitely something we're missing. When these are consumed fresh, there's a different sensory experience, a different potentially pharmacological experience as well. And so we're still learning. It's vitally important to have our collaborators in Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia now, where they can talk to traditional users and really get to some of these maybe nuances that we're missing or not seeing as we talk to users in the United States and what their subjective experiences are. So we're missing something. If I had to make some guesses, I would start to go down the roads of terpenes and some of these things, just like we see are important in cannabis and many other psychoactive plants. But we still have not put an effort into harnessing anything other than the alkaloids at this point.
Well, just to spend a minute on the lighter side of this story, can you explain the origin of the name mitragyna, of the genus of this plant?
Oh, yeah. So this is an interesting little tidbit that I learned when I was in Southeast Asia. And the leaf of the plant itself is where the name originates from for mitragyna species, and so, or the genus. There's 10 different species underneath this. Of course, we're talking about mitragyna speciosa, which we now also know is a pure variety, but there are many hybrids even being consumed in the marketplace in both the traditional sense and in the U.S. But the leaf itself is shaped like a bishop's hat, kind of fitting that we're in the conclave right now, right? But and the word for bishop is mitre. And so the derivative of the genus actually came from that mitre's hat, or mitragyna.
Well, it's rather a delicious irony that a plant that's a staple of these Muslim cultures is named after a bishop's hat.
It is. I guess that might point back to some of the people that actually were responsible naming, though. So.
Entirely possible. Well, another quote of yours that I wanted to share with our listeners, quote, "Many people are using kratom to move themselves off prescription opioids, and one of the biggest reasons is because they report that they do not go into withdrawal. Also, these users indicate that kratom has a mood-enhancing property that helps them re-engage back into society." Now, again, we don't prescribe anything on the show, but I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on these examples that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I receive emails almost on a constant basis of stories that people are thankful for the work that we're doing and the light that we're shedding and education we're providing in this area. But most of those emails, I would say 98% of those emails are positive and have a anecdotal story attached to them of individual that was hooked on prescription drugs or illicit opioids, and basically had lost a job, lost family, was becoming socially detached from their friends, and really fallen into that sort of typical drug abuse sort of life that one might think of when you're completely consumed by a substance. And these individuals say they stumbled upon Kratom or Kratom, and they decided to give it a try, and lo and behold, they were suddenly not only out of pain, but they were having energy and getting up off the couch. Their mood was improving. Pure opioids are depressants, so it makes sense that an opioid would cause you to sort of exacerbate a depression-like state. These compounds seem to be mood elevating the compounds are mood elevating that are in Mitragyna speciosa and Kratom, and so they seem to really help individuals re-engage and get back to their life and be participatory in their family activities again, get jobs, maintain jobs. I know I was just at the Arkansas State Capitol a couple of weeks ago testifying in their House of Representatives on a bill that was being put forth to actually ban the substance or regulate it a little bit tighter. And there were several witnesses that came up to testify about how they were consuming Kratom. They were under the influence of Kratom, if you will, while they were testifying. They were very eloquent in their speech. They weren't, looking like you would think a drug user would look. They were very well dressed, clean cut, and just really remarked on how it had helped them engage back in their life, keep their jobs, be a better father, mother, family member, and whatnot. And so there's something very exciting about a natural product that not only can be beneficial for health ailments, but also be beneficial for productivity in life.
Well, this goes to the basic tenet of our podcast, which is that indigenous peoples know stuff that we don't. Rainforests have stuff that we don't. And it's that combination of biocultural conservation, appreciation, and study, which is the sweet spot. I mean, here you had the brightest minds in the scientific world, and none of these guys had ever heard of this a couple of decades ago. And now it's offering great hope for opiate withdrawal. It's offering hope for a variety of ailments, but I want to touch on something you just mentioned, which is mood enhancement. I was listening to the radio recently, and they said, if you're not stressed and depressed, you're not paying attention. So whether you're addicted to opioids or not, I think there's obviously a great need and desire for mood enhancement. And in reading the literature on this incredible plant, it says that users report increased euphoria, sociability, and motivation, and it's sometimes useful not just for opiate withdrawal, but for treating depression or just general anxiety.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And the majority of people, we've conducted large surveys really in collaboration with Kirsten Smith at Johns Hopkins, Oliver Grundmann here at the University of Florida. We've conducted large surveys where we've interviewed people on their motives for use. And the vast majority is not to get off of opioids. The vast majority of responders is really to enhance their mood and lift their spirits.
Well, this is a major focus of the Amazon Conservation Team, which is what sponsors this podcast. We're an AmazonTeam.org. Our focus is obviously the Amazon. But if you want to learn more about people and plants and fungi, check out our website at amazonteam.org. And by way of this particular plant and Dr. McCurdy, I'm going to put in a lot of stuff on the show notes so people who want to read some of Chris's wonderful papers and get more information. I mean, there's so much information out there. There's more information all the time, but what do you trust? Because a big problem with herbal medicines is that people copy off each other, and some of these people don't know anything in the first place. So going to the source is always what I recommend. And when you're talking about this particular plant, this is where you want to go. Now, I'd like you to talk just a little bit, Chris, about why University of Florida is so well situated with its research, with the connection between both the medical aspects and the agricultural aspects.
Yeah, I got recruited to the University of Florida in 2017 from the University of Mississippi, which is where the federal marijuana farm is. And so I've been around a mixture of medicine and agriculture and plants-based medicine and agriculture my entire academic career now. However, the state agricultural school in Mississippi is Mississippi State, not the University of Mississippi. At the University of Florida, we're fortunate to have a full academic medical center in every discipline of medicine, including veterinary medicine, which we are collaborating with veterinary medicine on some Kratom projects. And we are the state's agricultural powerhouse. And so to have that sort of converge in one place, the University of Florida is uniquely positioned for plants-based medicine of any kind, because we can do everything from understanding seed, cultivation, propagation, harvest, commercialization, all of these types of things from the plant side of it. But then we can take those plant-based medicines and start to investigate them in the preclinical setting, all the way up through phase 2 clinical trials. And we can do all of that at the University of Florida, which makes it a very, very unique place amongst academic institutions in the United States. I think there's only 3 institutions that I'm aware of that have that type of capability. And so, we were fortunate. As soon as I arrived on campus, I was reached out to by one of our horticultural faculty who was very interested in studying the plant. And since then, we have a few faculty that have gotten interested from the agricultural side on the plant, and this has led us into unraveling some of the biosynthetic pathways of the alkaloids, understanding the genomic mapping, DNA barcoding of these, so we can start to figure these out. And we're just finishing whole genome analyses of several of the species of Mitragana genus, so that we can really understand what's happening. And that's where, as I alluded to before, where we're getting these hybrids in the marketplace, we're actually seeing that and understanding that now from a genetic standpoint. So to be able to go from plant genetics to human genetics, which we're also very top-notch at the University of Florida in precision medicine and understanding individual variations and responses to drugs. These are all things that really, really make this a very unique and wonderful research environment. And I'm very happy.
Thank you for joining us on Plants of the Gods. If you're interested in learning more about the power of traditional plant knowledge and the communities that protect it, visit us at amazonteam.org. There you'll find more stories, resources, and ways to support the Amazon conservation team's work with indigenous and local communities across the Americas.